Bryan Fischer here for D1 Ticker and Collegiate Sports Connect. Thrilled to be at the 2025 NCAA Convention here in Nashville, joined by NCAA President Charlie Baker. Charlie, thanks for stopping by.
It's good to see you.
Are you the busiest man here, the slowest? Are you the most wanted? Like, how would you describe your role as you have eased into it?
I think there's a lot of people who are quote-unquote working the room, and it's a very big room here on a whole bunch of issues. But for me, it's a chance to catch up with sort of leaders across all three divisions and to have what I would describe as kind of the kickoff to our policy making, which will run from now through probably June or July, and then obviously the clock starts all over again at the beginning of the next year. So there's a lot of meeting and a lot of activity that's packed into these 3 days.
Is the House going to pass? Is the settlement going to transpire? Is that all the questions that you're getting, or is
a lot of it's about the House settlement. A lot of it's about all the other issues that are out there, and I think there's a lot of talk about the basketball tournament. Is it going to expand? Is it not going to expand? If it does, what's it going to look like? A lot of follow-up on the championships that have already taken place and on the ones that are coming in the sort of next few months, and then again at the end of the school year. And I would say it's a pretty broad portfolio of issues and challenges, but certainly the work everybody's doing to try to prepare for and get ready for the implementation of the settlement, presuming that the judge gave it preliminary approval back in the fall, and that it's likely to get approved ultimately in April.
It is likely, but there's been certainly a lot of news reports, a lot of people that have weighed in. Is there a plan if it doesn't?
I think at this point everybody's assuming that they have to prepare for it happening, and I look at what happened this I can't remember if it was this past week or this week, which was the decision for the folks who were challenging USC at the NLRB to step back. I mean, that was Ramogi Huma and a lot of the folks, he's the National Players Association. I mean, he said some pretty nice things about the settlement and about the post-eligibility insurance program and a lot of the work we've been doing. And basically, I think that's an interesting message in the context of whether or not this thing's going to get approved. I think there are a lot of people who believe that the process of getting there will be complicated and probably messy. But at the end of the day, it will be a huge improvement over where we've been historically. And that, for me, is sort of the ultimate objective.
Named plaintiffs also sent a letter to Judge Wilkin about potentially collective bargaining. Do you ever see that happening under your leadership?
It's really not my call, first of all. And secondly, I'm really focused on just getting this thing approved. And I think one of the things that people should remember here is, nothing in this space ever happens all at once. I mean, it all ends up being incremental. I mean, you can push it as hard as you want, and I certainly talked about creating some sort of a framework like this over a year ago, and I'm thrilled we're where we are with regard to that, and a lot of people worked really hard to make that happen. But I think fundamentally, I'm kind of where, believe it or not, where Ramogi Huma was, which is let's get the settlement done, and then let's see what happens after that.
You mentioned the basketball championship, a lot of talk about that as well. When it comes to the Autonomy 4, they've obviously discussed a number of their proposals that they might want to bring forward. Where are the discussions like from your perspective on that?
So we told all the conferences in D1 that we were going to put together a working group appointed by the D1 board to sort of figure out what the right operating model would be post-settlement for D1. And we collected a lot of input on this from a bunch of different schools and conferences, including a proposal from the A4, but that was one of many. And this group that we put together, which will be very familiar names to everybody who's been around college sports, they're really going to be the entity that's going to sift through this stuff and talk about it. And then ultimately it has to get approved by the D1 board.
Are you at all worried, especially in this era of, if you want to say, athlete empowerment, are you at all worried that athletes might just walk off at an NCAA tournament game?
The one thing I've figured out about a lot of these young people that I've had a chance to meet, winning a national championship is a very big deal. And it's something you can carry around for the rest of your life. And I certainly believe that from all the kids I've talked to, the opportunity and the chance to play for and win a national championship is almost an overwhelmingly significant opportunity. And I find it very hard to believe anybody would walk away from that. I also believe that when we get to the point where we have real institutional NIL, which would be part of the settlement ultimately if it got implemented, I'm sure part of that would involve commitments from both sides that people would play in championships. Although I really don't think you need to work very hard to get a lot of young people to decide they want to play in a tournament. Every kid I've ever talked to who's played, advanced, and won just glows when they talk about it.
I don't want to necessarily call you a veteran NCAA president, but you've been on the job for a while now. Has your leadership approach changed going through things like this and getting this House settlement over the line?
Well, I got to remember, I was, I spent most of my career in healthcare and in public service, and those are pretty distributed decision-making models. So I'm kind of used to the idea you don't always get what you want, and I'm also used to the idea that sometimes it takes longer than you like for things to get where you want them to go. The one thing I was pretty sure about here when I got here was we needed to do a bunch of things to change the way we were doing business. And I'm pleased with the progress we've made. We still obviously have a ton of work to do. And as you know, we are right in the middle of some of the most important elements of that.
Is there an end goal in sight in terms of where you want things after the settlement progresses and ultimately potentially gets approved?
I think the big thing for me is I want it to work. And when people say, what does that mean? I don't want kids to have to rely on text messages from anybody to determine whether or not somebody who's offering them something is real. I don't want kids to be in a position where they feel like they're being lied to or discover they're being lied to after the fact. I want the primary relationship between a young person and a school to be the primary relationship, so that schools have an obligation and a responsibility to help those young people not only advance on the field of play, but also in the classroom and in their own personal development. For me, those things are sort of most fundamental to what I want to see come out of this. I also want to see us be in a place and at a time where people believe there's accountability and transparency, both at a process basis and a decision-making basis. I mean, there are so many examples that float up into the media of just really bad behavior by a lot of third parties and others. And you end up with this sort of like thing about, well, whose fault was that? One of the things I think is really important here is, by creating a cap management system, by having some sort of process to approve NIL deals, the deals will be real, right? And everybody's going to know what everybody's committed to. And there'll be a much more explicit process around that, which I think for kids especially and for their families is a much better option than what we've got now. Speaking
a couple of weeks, obviously, before a new administration takes charge, you have new Congress coming in, changes in the parties. Where are we with things happening in Washington, D.C.?
Well, the big message I got from Washington when I first started visiting with people was clean up your own house and then come talk to us. And that was code for deal with the post-eligibility insurance stuff, do something about additional benefits and some sort of model that looks like the one we're working with the courts and with the A4 on. And then if you want to come talk to us. And I think a lot of the fact that Gavin Newsom vetoed a bill around NIL in California and basically said, look, the settlement is going to solve this problem and we shouldn't be doing this differently in all 50 states. That was a pretty big statement, and it's one that I think a lot of people in D.C., just looking at how all these things pop up all over the place all the time, are sort of getting used to this notion that on some issues there probably does need to be a national standard. They probably ought to deal with the employment question. They probably ought to deal with, the NIL piece, and they really ought to give the NCAA the ability to at least make reasonable rules and have them stick.
Has this job changed you, or have you been able to change this job?
Well, I certainly know a lot more than I knew about sort of the way college sports works when I came in, and generally speaking, I tell people all the time, I love the kids. Right. I think they're great. The sprawling of and the scale of the experiences that schools and kids have across college sports is much broader and more significant than I thought it was. And I think if I brought one thing to the job, I think most people would say that, the fact that I talk to all the conferences every year, the fact that I go to a lot of the championships that people normally don't see the NCAA president at, that I've tried to be available and visible and approachable are things that I've tried to make sort of a hallmark of the way I do the job. And I do think, based on what I've heard back from other people, that sort of that idea of trying to retail this job is something people appreciate.
I mean, I asked you last year at NACTA if this was your last job, and you said you didn't know. And
you asked me that question like 65 different ways, as I recall.
Well, others
Think.
others have asked you that as well, especially in light of recent reports out of your old state of Massachusetts. Yeah. Have you given any thought in terms of what your future is in the role and what you might want to do next?
I'm pretty focused on what's in front of me right now, and I really do enjoy this. I think there are huge opportunities and possibilities for the fan database, for the new governing model, and for us to sort of elevate the exposure, the visibility, and the importance of college sports, because no other country has anything like it. And I think the work that we can do going forward to make it more than it is more than exciting enough for me.
As you meet with a lot of those conference commissioners or conference ADs or student athletes, what's the best leadership tip that you've picked up from people that you've met?
You're much better off listening than you are talking. My dad used to say, your receiver is a lot more important than your transmitter. And his fundamental notion on that was you'll be a lot smarter if you have the opportunity to learn from others than if you only have the ability to learn from yourself. And I think I've always said to everybody in every group I've been in, with young people especially, but that your greatest opportunity for growth is going to be your ability to really hear what other people think and have to say. It will make you better.
As you think of college athletics in general right now, do you feel like it's in a good place and certainly better than when you took over?
I think we're making progress on a lot of the stuff that people were most concerned about. I think the post-eligibility insurance program is actually paying kids' claims and doing the work associated with that. The settlement, I think, creates a framework finally that can deal with a lot of the stuff that has been historically out there around D1. And I think the biggest challenge we've got going forward is figuring out how to be more visible in a world in which almost everything is digital. I mean, part of the reason for that fan database is I want to get to the point, we have 13 million people in it now, I want to get to 25, and I want to fill it out a bit with respect to who's in there and what they're interested in, where they went to school, where they lived, and all the rest, so that we can be in a position to actively promote college sports across all three divisions, key rivalry games, tournaments, our tournaments, their tournaments, and to raise kind of the visibility and the exposure to college sports. Because at the end of the day, what kids want more than anything, in addition to a chance to compete, is a chance to have people watch them perform. I mean, a stadium, an arena, a ball field filled with fans, that's what, that's what you want if you're playing,
Absolutely. Well, that's a great note to end it on. I know you are a busy man here around the NCAA Convention. Charlie, thank you so much for stopping by here at the D1 Ticker Set in Nashville.